As being the Spotify guy, I'm guessing you're going to wait for a lot of fun culture stuff, music, art. I have a very, very heavy set of data and graphs coming up on the next few slides. So first disclaimer. Second disclaimer is that you'll see a lot of Spotify in this, but what I would really like you to take away from this is not so much that Spotify is great, which it is, but it's more about challenging some of the preconceived notions that we may have. You can substitute Spotify with any other platform of choice, but what we really want to do here today is to try and provoke you to think a little differently about the way that you approach marketing, media, etc. And we'll run through some stats and numbers for that. You'll see Spotify sprinkled across it, but at the end of it, if these numbers provoke you to ask tougher questions of your own teams, of your agencies, of people like us, in terms of where the real meat and what you're doing is, I think that'll be a success, right? So let's jump straight in. And actually, am I moving the slides? Are you doing it? I think I'm doing it, right? Okay, great. And actually, I heard Karthik earlier, and I love the two examples he gave. And you know what's the best part about those two? Both had amazing music with them, so I think he missed out that well. We're going to spend some time on attention, and before we do that, here's a quick thought exercise for all of you. All of us consume a ton of media, various, you don't have to show hands, etc. Just think of it to yourself. Think of 5 ads you really remember from yesterday. 5. I'm sure you've spent time on Instagram and YouTube, TV. You've been driving down the roads. You're looking at outdoor advertising, etc. 5 ads you remember really well, especially if they're on digital. If you can remember 5 ads, you have very high attention, but I'm pretty sure most people can't, right? And that's really the problem. I think over time, and again, referring back to what Karthik said, and don't worry so much about the graphs, I can talk through them. But referring to what Karthik said, we have a lot of jargon, we have a lot of stats, and many times we start mistaking output for outcomes. What has happened in the whole screen-based visual world is that we've been looking at things like viewability, completion rate, et cetera, but nobody's really asking, like, how is it making a difference? Suppose I'm planning something on very high viewability, and I know for a fact that my ad is playing on some screen, and it has the opportunity to be in front of somebody, great. But is that good enough? Is it really making a difference? And based on all the research that we've seen, not just from Spotify, but also from several third parties, one of whom I'll speak about now, there is really no correlation between people remembering and paying attention to your stuff to anything like viewability or completion rate or any of that, right? What really matters, and like I said, there's a lot of data. And the fundamental reason for it is that we try to think that people are all linear, that they perform a certain way and they think a certain way when they're on a certain medium, but that's not the case. We keep switching between our modes of consumption. You have active modes of consumption, you have passive modes of consumption. Sometimes you're distracted, sometimes you're not. Like, one of the reasons why we actually took the lead in solving for attention in India is because, one, nobody else is doing it. And my guess, nobody else is doing it because most of the large platforms, especially the two where most of the money goes, I know that if they do this, their numbers will look really bad, right? So and that's why nobody's investing time to figure out where is consumer attention. We did it for one reason, because we knew that we were really good at it, but we also wanted to solve for the industry. The second reason why we did this, because I noticed one very funny thing. My friends who are on Spotify would keep telling me, I keep hearing the same ad on Spotify, right? Nobody tells me that when they're watching IPL. And nobody tells me that when they are on, some OTT platform or on their radio when the same ad plays. And to me, that was more opportunity than a threat. It just meant that for some reason, what we're doing is creating more of an impact in people's minds, is remembering it more. And we wanted to figure out from a data perspective, why is that happening? Why do people remember, some people remember some stuff more than others when everybody else is pretty much buying the same thing? And this whole optimizing for views, for cheaper CPMs, et cetera, is basically leading us down a pile where there's a bunch of data and no outcomes that we can really bitch on to say, okay, based on what this data is, I'm actually making a difference in the mind of the consumer, right? I mentioned earlier about passive and active listening. From a Spotify perspective, you can think about it this way. One is when your hands are busy, but your mind is free. You're doing some chores, you're vacuuming the house, or whatever it is, and there's something going on. Versus when you're listening to a podcast on a run, or you're in the gym and you really want to sort of, be motivated for that last bit of your workout, you're actually listening very actively. And that all happens within the same session, right? It can happen within that 1 hour that I spend on a platform. And so how do you really plan for that? How do you measure that? And how do you make sure you get the most out of what you're doing online specifically? And that's also the reason why most reach curves don't work, right? You will have a reach curve with a certain amount of frequency and reach planned, and all of the other great math that goes into it. But if you actually adjust that for, okay, out of all of this, how many people did my message actually register with? The actual effective reach that you're getting where your message actually landed is very, very different from what you actually think you're getting, right? So the reason I'm building this sort of background is to make sure that once we do this, if this data looks interesting to you and meaningful to you, hopefully here we can start sort of shifting the conversation away from not just outputs to outcomes, and you can start sort of challenging people to say, okay, this is great, but show me how it's making a difference. And like Karthik said, again, it doesn't mean a brand lift study, it means actual measurable outcomes that you can get in terms of what your marketing is actually doing, right? And when we looked out at the India landscape, what we realized is there's no research happened. Nobody has worked on it. But we know that it's a very hot topic globally. In several countries, especially in the developed markets, attention-based planning is becoming more and more important. And the driving force behind a lot of that is Dr. Karen Nelson-Field, whom we work with, to do a bunch of studies in India. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on methodology and all of that, but just know that we spoke to thousands of people. We looked at a bunch of different metrics, and we wanted to oh, it's going backwards, sorry. And we looked at a bunch of different metrics to understand. We measured, social media, we measured online video, we measured short form video, we measured Spotify, because even if we had data for ourselves, we still needed to benchmark everybody else to give a comparison of what this really means. So let's jump in straight in, skip the methodology piece, and talk about the results, right? What are the first thing you want to look at? The first thing you want to look at is something called your advertising strength in the short term. At the time when the ad plays, how much attention am I really getting, right? Not about on a cumulative basis, not at some frequency, but yeah, right now there's a user session. Right now my ad is playing. What delta did it really make? We see that the results are really strong here. Where it gets really interesting is that we also found that typically mediums that have supposedly very high user engagement actually have the lowest attention, because you can think about consumer behavior. It's all scroll, 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 scroll. If you're not even spending a second or two, where is that attention going to come from? And what we realized is, one, high engagement platforms like Spotify, and again, I know there's a lot of Spotify here. I just want you to think of any platforms that can really drive a huge amount of connection in the consumer's mind, and you can replace it with Spotify, it's fine. But the point is, the moment you start involving platforms and including platforms that can drive a high degree of attention, all your other mediums also start working better, right? The third thing we wanted to look at is, okay, how long can this last, right? Are we just talking about 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds? And what we found is, if you really want your great creative to land within the time frame and the length of that creative, again, attention-based planning becomes extremely important. The more you focus on where is consumer attention, the better the chances for your consumers to actually engage with the message that you have. And finally, I think the most important thing, and this is something that I know many marketers care about, you brief your creative agency, they come up with this sexy creative idea, it's going to be a magnum opus, it's going to win a bunch of awards, you're very proud of it. And then you go ahead and put it on a platform for a week. After that, the 45-second becomes 30 seconds, then it becomes 15 seconds, then it becomes 10 seconds, and then by the end of it, it's just, this is the price, this is the product, whatever. So what we found is that on most platforms, the delta between good creative and bad creative is very small, right? So all that work you put into creating this really beautiful TV ad or radio ad or whatever it is, all the work that went into it, your platform choices are letting it down, right? Because if you put in a lot of work and you get a certain delta and somebody else just made a very basic ad with very little cost, that's just talking, and that got the same delta, then where is the room for that creativity to really expand and give you the results it want? Again, if you have fantastic creative, please think about putting it on platforms that can drive a very high degree of attention from consumers so that that delta of creativity actually shows up. We call it elasticity and so on, but don't worry so much about the jargon. Think about how do you really make sure that the time, the effort, the investment you're putting in has the legs to actually deliver what you want out of it, right? And whether you're specifically coming from an auto perspective or not, as marketers, the more tough questions you ask of the people around you who are telling you about these solutions and the data and the stats, the better it is going to be to the long term. To really aid this year, and this is the one thing that I would love for all of you to take away as well, we're actually opening up attention measurement across platforms to a select set of people. if you really want to do this and you haven't tried it and you haven't thought about it, but you know that it's really important and it's something that's a trend that's emerging globally, and you want to do this in India, please talk to us. We will not only help you with measuring attention of what you do on Spotify, we'll help you measure it everywhere. And then based on the data that you get from that, you can start making better choices and then make sure that all the time, effort, investment that's going into all the work that you're doing is actually generating the best results. We're working with a couple of partners here in India who are going to bring this out in, a first of its kind sort of measurement capabilities backed by proper tech, transparency, and third-party verification. So if you want to experiment, if you want to make better media decisions, if you really want to know how can you make your money work harder for everything that you're doing, please let us know. We'd love to make you a part of the cohort that is going to go into this. And hopefully all of you have great data at the end to make the right decisions. Bang on time, 10 minutes. Thank you. Hopefully the next time I come, I have some culture and music and pop star stuff, but hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for your time.